Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ian Lawless. I am Content and Conference Director here at Procurement Leaders. Delighted to be joined today by Graham Copeland. Graham, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure, Ian. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. Graham, you are Senior Director of Business Development at GEP. Give us a little bit of colour, a little bit of an insight for our audience today of your role, your responsibility.
Well, at GEP, I am a sales leader. And I look after their managed services and advisory procurement business sales. In a previous life, I have been procurement director at various large UK-based FTSE 100 and Fortune 500 companies. I've also been a procurement consultant for a long while, and as you can tell by the photograph, I do amateur musical theatre as well.
Well, nothing amateur about this webinar over the next 45 minutes, that's for sure. There's some great content that we're going to be sharing with our audience today, and I also did that myself as well. So good to be able to meet a fellow thespian on such a call today. We can share some great stuff with the audience on a really interesting topic, I think, and we're going to be exploring in some more detail 6 ways that CPOs can boost their influence. Really prevalent given kind of the way that the functions progressed, certainly over the last couple of years, and really accelerated that relationship with the organisation. I guess to just some additional context from me, just as we dive into the conversation itself for today, there's some areas that we are specifically going to be covering. But when you think about C-suite executives, they've really have been cautious previously about investing in back office functions as inflation continues to impact budgets. Meanwhile, as we've seen, that expectation of procurement has really changed. And as a CPO, how can you really become now the trusted advisor that goes beyond that cost-cutting measure that leads to the innovation change and charge that's required as well? So we might be able to unleash some of the secrets today, I guess, and how to appeal to certain emotions first and then logic second, and apply what is considered good practice based on sales science as well, and what procurement should your pitch deck really look like, and what should your story be. And Graham's going to be able to dive into that with us over the next 40 minutes or so. So we are going to look at how we build that narrative, how we can outline potential hidden risks and the tools that are needed to ensure that the enterprise is also prepared, but also have a look at link procurement success to that overall outcome by emphasising the urgency of the risk and the value proposition as you see there. One last bit for me before I hand over to Graham, we get into the meat of the conversation, and point number 1. This is an interactive webinar. Please do put in your questions to us throughout. It'd be great to hear what you as an audience are thinking and reacting to. There are additional resources available on the additional resources tab. You can see some of the great thought leadership that we do in partnership with GEP, and also provide your feedback. Always useful for us to be able to look at how we can improve the service. Technical difficulties, I'm sure there won't be any, but if there are any, please do kind of contact Molly and our team on the help section, and they'll be able to help out via the question box as well. So, as mentioned, these are some of the areas that we're going to cover today, but let's dive into slide number 1, Graham. I'll hand over to you for a bit of an overview, as I've gone a tiny bit too far on the first piece there. I'll click one for us into the 6 areas that we are going to cover. Over to you, sir.
So thank you very much, Ian. So yeah, for those of you listening today, the 6 topics we're going to touch on, 3 of which are positional, foundational. The top 3, I'm going to give you some tools to help you evaluate how to position procurement right. And the best procurement leaders, the goals they have are aligned with procurement and the business very well. However, there are many firms through legacy or through having the wrong functional ownership above them have outdated links and misaligned goals. So we're going to look at how to address that. Then we're going to set the stage. Number 2, in new procurement functions, then how do you draw the boundaries of where you want to set your markers as a function? We're going to talk about that. And doing that can be both complex in terms of where should I push to be involved, where should I let go, but also could be dangerous politically if you are to go about it the wrong way. So setting the right rules and the right tone for your organisation, we're going to cover that there. Number 3, getting the right operating model for procurement. It's a resource-constrained world with shortages of talent, of investment, and with technology as well, all competing. So how do you pick where to prioritise as a procurement function, and how do you ensure you are not too reliant on one key resource or one key set of capabilities. Number 4, that prioritizing of resources. So you have your investment. Number 4, how do you then prioritize those resources? There is a desire for procurement to be superheroes, to do everything these days. And so whether that's sustainability, savings, or digitalization, how do you pick where to prioritize at the moment in order to maximize your influence? The last 2, framing your message. This is me using some of my 15 years in the sales side. How do you frame a good procurement message so it's not just dull and boring to the C-suite, so that it maximizes the chances of it being listened to when you are looking for investment? And what a clue there is not to focus on ROI. There we are. That's something we'll talk about later. And number 6, leverage sales science. That's a little bit about what other things can the sales world bring to the way you go about framing and positioning a request for investment, so that you can again be most likely to get your money. So that's what we're going to cover in the journey.
And not a short amount for us to have a look at over the next next 35 to 40 minutes or so as well, Graham. Some really interesting areas, some interesting topics that we're going to be able to discuss. Just a reminder to our audience, please do put your questions in, because there's an awful lot we'll be able to talk through here. But Graham, over to you. Let's have a look to begin with at that positioning procurement to win as well.
Yeah, okay, great. So despite lofty ambitions to expand procurement's remit into wider areas like sustainability and growth, still the majority of CPOs I speak to are still being tasked or coming in to functions with large savings targets on their heads, and looking for ways to expand and work out what you want to become as a function. Despite those ambitions, and the reality of the targets is a challenge. So where do you start in terms of positioning? Because the best way to position yourself successfully and build reputation is through consistent delivery. But if you set your procurement function and goals up wrongly, you can quite quickly end up in a pickle. So here are 4 flavors, as you can see on the screen, of potential procurement functional transformation activities. And how do you define them? Well, one of the parameters on the top there, the y-axis, is how do you define value in your organization? And if the target is broadly defined in terms of what can count as value, in terms of might be ESG, it might be around demand management, it might be around about many things that the wider business value. If you can get to a place there, then you can operate at the higher end of these procurement transformation activities. But if you're stuck in the world of profit and loss, same for less savings definitions, then you'll have to play in the lower end. And then on the x-axis, how aligned and how supportive are your stakeholder group with working with procurement? So where you have a mature stakeholder group who are delighted to work with the procurement, or at least willing to, then you can operate on the right-hand side. But where you have an environment where there is either no appetite to work with procurement or active hostility to doing so, you're going to have to work in a more permissions-based world. So driving the decisions about choosing the right approach, and I've been in a world where I sought to apply category management principles in a world that only valued a very small savings measure, and it didn't really work. So I've played in different quadrants of this personally, and I've failed and succeeded. And I built this as a way of trying to work out what went wrong, and indeed what went right. And so that's where this comes from. I'll just talk about a couple of these just now, just in the interest of time. But in the bottom left, especially in a decentralized world where you don't have a lot of immediate power as a CPO, as a new CPO or a procurement team, the bottom left, that permissions-based transformation, is where you have a limited mandate, is a tricky place to be. Here, you've got to line up friendly functional leaders and build momentum through successes, small successes, and advocacy from a small pool of people, and then seeking to constructively challenge, build relationships over time, and play the long game in order to expand the reach of your services. That's what you have to do in a permissions-based world, and it's a very different relational-based sell as a procurement function. and one that requires guile and skill and political nonce as well, compared to some of the others. On the other extreme, let's look at the strategic business partner. And obviously, that's a great place to be if you've got a place where both the C-suite are on board with your agenda, and you can look very broadly at what constitutes its value. And here you can do a whole range of activities. It's the ideal place really to be. You can be looking to look at a wide range of levers to pull to extract value from the supply base. You can be looking at innovation. You can be looking at top line contributions. You can be looking at different tactics, and even using strategic business partner principles, i.e. putting people in the business to be inside the functional group rather than being a central function outside, and being part of the core team as a real advisor to the group. It's the best place to be, and obviously some procurement functions get there, but it's the panacea really. There are other flavors, and if you want to talk about them outside of the webinar, or even if we have time at the end, we can do that. But I just wanted to draw attention to two of those. But the principle for me is simply, it's easy for a new CPO or a procurement function to head down the wrong path when situating their function. And my hope is that this model helps everyone take a step back and think about, well, am I going about things in the right way given my organizational context?
Perfect. I think that's a really good takeaway here for our audience as well. In that respect, for today, there's no one size fits all within a particular approach like this. It's with what's your own organizational context, what's your organizational design, what does your industry kind of require, allow you to react to, with the way in which that you position procurements to be able to win. Thanks, Graham, for kind of giving us that initial overview to begin with. I think if we do have time at the end, as you say, it'd be certainly interesting to maybe talk a little bit more around some of the aspects of the category management-led transformation, given a lot of the organizations that we certainly work within our global community have got a strong focus in that area still, and one for us to have a little bit dive into perhaps during the Q&A if there are questions that come in that area. But the second section then, Graham, if we move on to that then now, you've given us a great overview of how we position procurement to win. How do we now start with kicking this off and help to set the stage initially?
It can be very exciting as a new procurement director or CPO coming into an organization with a clean slate. But obviously the business has operated quite effectively without you and your team, possibly, forever, or for a while. So, or they've chosen to ignore the existing procurement function without penalty or repercussion in the past. So when you've decided how to fit yourself in the business, how do you then set your markers? How do you then set your stage to know that this is where I want to play? And is it worth the battle? Because sometimes you've got to take on powerful stakeholders to say there's a real reason I should be involved here. So obviously there are many reasons why procurement are frequently left just working in the tactical or leverage categories. You know, we might be allowed to get involved in a print or a facilities or a software renewal, but it's the big spend areas that suddenly blindsided us, because if a senior powerful stakeholder has chosen to keep us out. So the general principle of whether to pick a battle or to decide to say, well, I need to do something about this now, this are quite widely written. So does the issue in question tie into one of my company priorities, and is it a company value that we want to stand beside and fight for? Even though we maybe disagree with what's happened from a powerful stakeholder, can we live with it, or would this be setting a precedent that would be damaging for the long term? And are you willing to trade any goodwill as a one-off to support a wider strategic aim? And do you have allies that will support you in the position of taking on the powerful stakeholder who doesn't want to work with procurement? And will this have a neutral or positive effect on the health of you and your team by taking this battle on? So considering all those factors, you've got to decide, okay, do I want to force this as part of my remit or not? And this 2x2 model on the screen here assesses, well, on the x-axis is the probability of success that you're going to have in enforcing a change based on, and that's a judgment call based on the power balance right now. And so do you have sponsorship from the board? Is the timing right? Are there historical relationships and external functions that you can use to influence the position of and likelihood of success here? And on the y-axis, and it's a little bit about specialist knowledge. So part of the reason people claim they don't need procurement is because they're the budget holder, they're the experts. They've been hired they're paid the big bucks to know about this market, whether that's marketing or technology or facilities or whatever it is. So do you as a team have that specialist knowledge as well? Can you demonstrate it credibly? And is that specialist knowledge problem, if you have a gap, surmountable, either through bringing in consultancy or bringing in short-term help, or indeed just building it up easily over time? So considering both those factors leads to different modus operandi for a buyer, and so you should think about where you sit in that quadrant. And if for example, you have little likelihood of success, and you have weak specialist knowledge in the category or in the area, you probably should either just follow for now and build up knowledge and experience and be the helpful servant, or get out the way, because you're not going to be contributing much. On the other hand, and I'll go to the top left here for the audience, if you are specialist equipped, you've got good skills, good knowledge, and on the other hand, you don't think you have much right to win the battle, then you want to consider, well, I'll maybe put somebody in as a secondment, or I'll put someone in to support them. So I'm building reputation, I'm building relationships, I'm building trust, and I'm showing some value, but I'm not going to try and threaten their power base by taking over straight away. And again, there's another couple of dimensions in that model that you can have as well. But in each area, you've got to work out how likely am I going to win the battle, and how much knowledge can I bring to bear to show value. And it's where those two equations come together, you can lead.
And I guess there's a variety of different things within that I guess as a new CPO or an aspiring CPO is also coming in, and they're thinking about how they set the stage for their own lens, that there are maybe some pitfalls that our audience should be aware of when coming into a new business around setting the stage. And I guess that's, you mentioned, touched on a couple there, kind of the culture and the reputation of the function before they've arrived, a misalignment on potential priorities as well. Is there any kind of one piece of advice or any advice in general that you would give kind of to our aspiring new CPOs that they should be aware of in those areas to help them as they come in really kind of stage as effectively as possible?
Well, it is a mix of politics and rational decision making, and it's a bit of a judgment. And the best CPOs manage this well and really well without sacrificing any kind of company values. It's always a fine balance, but my hope is this kind of decision model as a guide helps people work out, well, I can position my categories on here and know where I should resource up, where I'm likely to have the skills to make that journey a little bit easier.
Enough. Thank you for setting that out for us. I think we've looked at how we position procurement for a win. We looked at how we set the stage. We'll move on to our third area, which is getting the operating model right as well. We showed some. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Kind of, there's no one size fits all. It's very much dependent on kind of the organisations in which that you're all looking to solve for and work in. But talk to us a little bit here, Graham, about how we get the operating model right and what our audience can think about as CPOs boosting that influence for the C-suite.
Well, one of the surprising aspects of procurement is that we're the advocates of external spend, and we obviously are a custodian of that for the company. But we really want to spend much money externally ourselves, because often it's a sign of weakness to bring in external help. So when you end up with in some cases overstretched in-house teams under-delivering. So whilst there are examples of great individual heroics, trying to do everything. Fundamentally, many procurement organisations struggle to move into that strategic space because they're too busy bogged down in the administrative tasks. So why don't procurement teams focus on the core spend and themselves and pass over some of that capability to external parties, or automate or minimize it more? And I've wrestled with that myself. I've been on both sides of the table, and often wondered, why is the market for external bought-in services not larger? So what this decision model does, it's an adaptation of a McKinsey model, but it takes on board various aspects that should help CPOs think through, to maximize my influence, which things should I really do that are vital and important and strategic versus those things that are distracting and low value add. And also, so that's the y-axis. So how much contribution does the activity or category make? And then on the x-axis, you have what's my capability today, or what should my capability be tomorrow, from an in-house capability perspective. And obviously, if you've already built a strong in-house team to do something, and it's highly strategic activities that you're doing, then you're going to keep those activities in-house. Whereas if it's something where you've yet to build the capability on the left-hand side of the x-axis, and it's low value add, then you might want to either outsource it entirely or automate it or stop doing it. Or you might want to build it outside for a few years, see what it feels like, and then decide to bring it in. The more complex one is where you have some capability, you've built a good capability, perhaps, in-house, but it's not actually doing particularly strategic things. So what do you do with that? And then it becomes a bit of a cost-benefit analysis against the external marketplace as to whether it's worth continuing to do. It's needing to be done, but it might be economic to keep it in-house, depending on the value proposition you can get from the marketplace. So that's a core competency toolkit for a CPO to look within all the things your procurement team do, and think, well, I want to maximize my talent's influence by getting them focused on those critical activities. And I think procurement teams are guilty of not looking at that in the way that they themselves in the way that they do across the business. They're very good at encouraging facilities and technology teams to outsource, less so at times themselves. So I think this tool should be used every 6 months to evaluate, are we still doing the right things as a function? Are we still influencing where we need to?
Sorry, finding the mute button there on my side. Apologies. And some really interesting areas here again. I think you mentioned a little bit there about the automation piece and kind of finding the right balance and being able to automate, kind of when should you, outsourcing, kind of the aspect depending on what the kind of the level of the value of the task is. Just interesting. We worked with we partnered with GEP on the CPO Compass guide recently, which is procurement leaders look at some of the key areas and aspects that our global community and CPOs and leadership teams are looking at specifically as they go into 2023 on where they're looking at data and automation. And we found that 85% of the respondents in that particular they were looking at expanding the use of data across next year, with over to add to the next year, which when you think about that as an aspect of kind of the operating model and where you wish to be kind of putting the investment and looking for that it's internal forward, is there anything in particular, Graham, kind of either on those particular stats and that comment that you'd add to, or anything that kind of jumps out to you as you think about automation for next year, that you kind of recommend for our audience to think about as they look at their operating models?
You did break up a little bit, Ian, as you mentioned the CPO Compass and the key fact that you were trying to draw a parallel on, so I couldn't quite hear what you said.
It's always at the perfect time there, isn't it, for the actual stat? It was 85% are looking at investing more heavily in data and automation going into 2023, which I think is interesting to see kind of the where the area of focus, certainly when it comes to investment into technology, and also I suppose around capabilities for next year look. So I wonder how can, when you think about operating models for next year, kind of that greater automation that's being looked at by our community, is there any advice that you'd give for those who are looking at greater automation, balancing that with other priorities?
Well, automation obviously is a good thing where you're doing something repetitive, high volume. The challenge many of the businesses I speak to, the mid-enterprise side, is that they don't quite have the scale to really automate, because it also is quite a high setup cost to create a bot to do your work or whatever, you know. So, so whilst it makes absolute sense to automate at the big enterprise scale where you can, and there's good evidence of that working in certain P2P and order by desk type activities. The trick is to work out where can it work effectively when you're mid-sized, and at the moment that's quite a hard thing to do. The focus on data, obviously good data, everyone wants more data. The challenge I think CPOs have and procurement teams have is they've got so much data now, they don't really know what to do with it, and people need to get a bit more comfortable with ambiguity, because data is in it mostly backwards looking, and people need to get more comfortable making judgments in the absence of data, and that requires a different philosophy and mindset around judgment making, which often as a procurement function we're less keen to do because we're risk averse. So I think we do want more data. It's a good thing, but we also need to develop skill sets around ambiguity and judgment making as well. Shall I move on to number 4?
Fantastic. Thank you for your insight on that. Let's move on to the 4th. Yes, please. Let's do that.
So the last 3 points, 4, 5, and 6, start to move into the sales thinking arena. When we ask various stakeholders what do they think of procurement, you've got 3 camps really. Well, one is that visibility for procurement is poor. I don't know where my stuff is. I'm not really sure where the risks are in my supply chain, so procurement don't really have a good handle on it. And things like commitments, where have we made obligations? It's not clear. So that's one potential problem to fix. There's and tech can be the answer, a big part of the answer to that, to liberate and free up and provide that visibility. So that's the automation point we just discussed a little bit. On the agile piece in the middle, the biggest complaint probably is that procurement's too slow, that we're deal blockers, that we're the police, and there's an appetite for procurement to simply start. It needs to change fundamentally in some way. To become more agile, and then on the right, you've got a world of moving beyond savings and into a place of innovation and collaboration, and that might be ESG as well, or diversity, or whatever's important in your organization. And the problem procurement has is that it's being asked to do everything now, as Arcade Flyer said, but it has rarely has many extra resources. Some of the biggest companies in the world have in fact found some extra resources to fund some of these specialisms, but many mid-sized enterprises are struggling with the same team size, but being asked to do this wider remit. And so the success to starting to build influence, if you're going to start thinking about, I need to get investment in procurement, and that's points 5 and 6, we'll talk about that in a bit more. But you need to have a steady delivery credibility. You need to build your reputation. And how do you do that? You focus on the things that are broken and you fix them fast. You find those quick wins and you solve the problems there. So I think rather than trying to choose to be all 3 of these things, you have to, with your teams, work out which one of these is most broken, and then be the guy or the lady who's fixed that problem, and before moving on to the next one. And I think I know it's a luxury very few people have, but finding the ability to focus on the high impact low effort opportunities are the ones that build that reputation. That means that when you do go to the board for investment, they're likely to think, yeah, that's somebody I trust and know that they've done a good job fixing a problem. So that was really the key message on slide item 4 here.
Perfect. So everything now, quick wins, and build that reputation further. I love that. So then we move on to looking at how we actually frame the message in particular. There's an awful lot here. I think we could spend a bit of time as well, Graham. But yeah, talk to us a little about how we frame that message specifically for our C-suite.
Yeah, so there's the promise of procurement or any other support function, and then there's of course the reality, and the reality is that procurement is often perceived as a back office admin function that has made savings claims in the past that didn't really come true, or at least not in the eyes of some of the budget holders, and makes claims that are a bit dubious around how much value it can create that I don't really believe. So with that negative history mindset, how do you overcome that? And it's about framing. It's about framing the message properly. And when you are trying to sell in an environment of selling, you have to galvanize the board, and you have to galvanize anyone who you want to buy from to move away from a status quo, and that requires a really convincing narrative. So procurement has relied really heavily on selling its services based on an ROI or savings promise. Give me bigger team, I'll save you X hundred million, and I'll do it in 2 years. That's been the message from many CPOs in the last 20 years, and that's what has had some success, of course. But these are hard numbers, and that case sounds convincing to a CFO maybe, but to a C-suite board, it largely falls on deaf ears, and procurement people scratch their heads. Well, that doesn't make any sense. There's obvious benefits here. Why am I not getting the funding? And so part of that is that jaded perception of procurement, that we're simply cost cutters, or that we only play at the edges. The real meat's in the stakeholders who decide not to buy something. And our low stock as a function historically has played a role too. But any skilled salesperson will know that people buy on emotion first and logic second. So the way to pitch your procurement investment story should be based on that emotion first principle. So slide 1 or paragraph 1 of your story should be the slide about an external factor that's not controlled by the board. In procurement, that might be inflation or the recession or the shift towards digital or towards cloud native platforms. But the picture is made even stronger if it's some regulatory or legal change that's coming up, like the German supply chain laws. But it's the first paragraph should be, hey, things are changing in the world. And the second page, the second sentence, the second paragraph is the impact that's going to have on their strategic goals. And big businesses will typically have strategic objectives that are a mix of growth, like innovation or market share, or big on-trend areas like sustainability or digital. And but you need to come up to position that the business is ill-equipped to face this coming storm. And without action now, the shifts that you talked about in slide 1 will have a real damaging impact on your corporation. So if the case is for more procurement involvement, then argue that there's a lack of capacity and capability in the business, and given this greater complexity of the purchases, and therefore something needs to be done about it. And then we move into a third part of the story of this narrative, and you need to make the problem really real for them, and you'll do that through benchmarks and data. You'll bring in some of those numbers at this point, demonstrating that what they'll lose by inaction, not what they'll gain by doing something, more what they'll lose by inaction. The theory of loss aversion explains clearly why procurement people fail in securing much investment. It's because we talk about the future gain of working with us, and that's heavily discounted by the ears of the listener. People think future gains, ROI, are uncertain, and they heavily discount them. So, but if you can make people feel the pain of staying where they are today, then you can secure more success. So that's framing your message to maximize the chance that the board will pay attention by highlighting the world is changing, pointing out some hitherto unknown risk, and then sizing it around the loss rather than the gain.
Fantastic. Love that. What a great framework there to be able to frame the message very succinctly for the C-suite. And then it moves on to our final area, Graham, and this time we're going to look at how you leverage sales science as part of this as well. I think just to close this out as on our 6 areas, talk to us a little bit about this.
So loss aversion was my first direct sales concept that people need to learn about, and it's Daniel Kahneman's book, which has been in the business books for charts for a long time now. Thinking Fast and Slow, I'd recommend that one to you. But having shown the C-suite a convincing array of surprising but significant pain points, you need to help them envisage now a future that, with those pain points solved, maybe that's your dreamland of AI, Ian, that you mentioned, or whatever it is. You've got to paint that picture of improved on-time delivery, or less stockouts, or less pain. Not something abstract like profit, but you've got to bring it to life in terms of the actual impact it would have on them, and then reflect back how those strategic goals will be fixed by the solution. And then when you've shown both the pain and the opportunity, that's the gap. That's value, and that's where people will either be convinced or not of your proposal and your pitch. And then, if you've baited them that far, then you should show them the journey. Now, perhaps it's because you're looking to build out your team, or perhaps you're looking to hire a consultant or a BPO partner, or perhaps it's just technology investment you're looking for. But when you show them that journey, show them that you've considered options, because there's a single option aversion theory in sales, where potential buyers, don't want to ever feel that they've only been given one choice. They want to feel in control. So it's important to show that you've looked at other options very carefully, and having evaluated 2 or 3 is a good number, evaluated multiple options, that you think here's a recommended one, although the other 2 might be valid as well. Maybe one of the 3 might be a decoy, but at least 2 good options on the table, and allow the pros and cons of each to be shown in a balanced way. And in those, when you're showing those options, do show ROI and make financial claims, but remember, you're selling on emotion and gut rather than on those numbers primarily, and making them think, oh, that's a journey I want to go on that option. And then the final point is to tell them stories of those other companies like them who are already doing this. And that's the concept of social proof, and that you are not alone. Everyone's struggling with this problem. And we've got a chance to get ahead of the pack, but we're not alone in doing this. And if you invest here, it's not going to be a failure because everyone else is doing it. It's how the hype cycle gets carried away, because everyone starts to feel like they need to act and need to spend money on this now, because people want to be part of the pack, as so they don't look stupid. So using a model that shows your competitors or other similar firms, peer group firms, are doing this too, provides them intelligence, so they think, I get why they're doing that now, but also maintains their engagement levels. So having done those 6 things, you need to wrap up, and obviously a bit like Dragon's Den, wrap up with a compelling, to address a compelling final sentence, a bit like Dragon's Den, to address the threat X. We are seeking approval for option B that will additionally address strategic problem 1, 2, and 3. And thank you very much for your time, plaudits. And then wait for the questions, and obviously be very well rehearsed and prepared at that point. The questions and answers are often where these things fall and die. So you need to be really good at that point for well prepared. But at that point, you've hopefully got a room full of engaged people who will be receptive to your and maybe even forgiving to a couple of stumbles on the Q&A. So my hope is that with the perfect sales science-based pitch deck and your good political skills as a procurement leader, you will be able to gain enough support, and pre-syndicating it beforehand too obviously helps. Then your opportunities to secure procurement dollars are vastly improved.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Graham, for running us through those six particular steps. Great to work with GEP always on a session like this. There's a lot of innovation that comes out of the organisation as well. A lot of great products that GEP also and our community has the opportunity to leverage. Anything in particular you wanted to note here from that innovation angle perspective?
Well, GEP works with a lot of big global Fortune 500 companies to help improve procurement's impact and improve its efficiency, and also has a great technology platform to help with that digital journey. So if any of your audience want to get in touch and learn a little bit more about how we can help provide either the expertise, the managed services, or the software, I'd be delighted for anyone to give me a call.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I'm sure plenty of people will take the opportunity to follow up with the organisation afterwards. While we have you live, while we have you now, though, let's have an opportunity to ask some of those questions of you from the audience in this particular forum. And we've had some that have come in after you mentioned kind of this type of approach would give an opportunity to give a really engaged audience from the C-suite. I think that's exactly what we've had with those who've joined us today as well. So thank you so much, Graham, for running us through that. First question that's come in is around kind of what are the best practices around enforcing procurement policies that you could possibly recommend, Graham? Well,
procurement policies. Now, there's one of my favourite topics. I actually wrote a poem on that, writing a procurement policy. I can leave it in the link for somebody later. The point is, procurement policies are often written in a way that are far too complex, process-oriented how-to guides, and therefore no wonder people either don't read them or don't follow them. I've not met many procurement policies that stand up to much in terms of non-compliance is rarely sanctioned heavily. So you need to write a procurement policy that is more of a statement of intent and principle, guiding ideas that can be followed by the business without going into the detail of how it needs to be done. And I would recommend having no more than 10 of those, but then sticking to those 10 points with vigor. And obviously there are some level 1 policies around things like code of conduct, anti-bribery, etc., which will have more teeth. But I would use your procurement policy as a light document, and then communicate heavily to those 10 points so that they're easy to understand, easy to read, and don't get bogged down in the how.
Perfect. Thank you for that. The second question is coming. Great session, Graham. Thank you for running us through the framework. Which pain is the biggest for the C-suite this November 2022 and beyond? Let's extend that perhaps.
Well, on this, from the C-suite perspective, there's a great resource called IoT Analytics, which you can find them on the internet. And what they do is analyze the earnings calls of all the big organizations in the world around what words are they using. And so they do an aggregate analysis, a cloud map of that every quarter. And what we see in the one that was just released a couple of days ago, actually, is an increase in language around economic slowdown. So words like recession, hiring, layoff, downsizing. And that's become the most dominant and high importance attached words. So most CEOs are talking about those things. The most frequently occurring words are inflation, supply chains in there, and uncertainty. Declining in importance, although heavily talked about, are still COVID and Ukraine. But the emerging one is the economic slowdown, and so that's for sure the dominant. And all these factors have a direct relevance to procurement, right? All of these points either have a direct relevance to procurement or a direct relevance to supply chain. So yeah, I think it means that we are relevant as a function if we can talk the right language to CEOs.
Perfect. Another question that's coming on, we've spoken a lot about stakeholders in that wider ecosystem. One of our listeners asks, I'm looking for a way to benchmark vendor pricing. Can you recommend resources here, please? If you have any that you'd be to share.
Well, there are services that GEP offer around price benchmarking as part of both our consulting services and also our software tools. One of the things that we're seeing being asked more and more is should cost modeling services. So we have a product, for example, that draws all the likely price indices from the public domain and also subscription services, and helps our clients model what's likely to happen in the future due to market volatility around commodities. So we'd certainly be delighted to talk about that, but there are other providers out there too, I'm sure, obviously inferior.
Absolutely. They're not here today though, so that's the main thing. So
yes.
We'll certainly be able to connect you up with the relevant questioning on that one afterwards. And one more question, we've probably got one bit of time for one more, Graham. Are you seeing an increase in companies which have a CPO position in their executive suite?
I don't have any statistical viewpoint on that, because I'm sure that would be an interesting analysis to do in terms of the number of actual roles, of CPO roles, and how many are at the direct. So I don't have I don't have an empirical basis for that answer, but I would certainly say that CPO and CISO activity is more public, more visible. They're attending more earnings calls. And therefore that leads me to believe that there is a higher prominence given to our profession than ever before.
Yeah, I think everything that we're seeing from the procurement leader side as well, those CPOs that we see with our community certainly are much more elevated, and reporting lines certainly changing into different parts of the C-suite, certainly from CFO to COO or even directly to CEO, etc., with greater influence. So it's great to see kind of that really extending further and further. Unfortunately, Graham, we're pretty much at time. Fascinating to be able to talk with you today. I think some just very quickly from my perspective and for our audience, once again, those 6 steps that Graham shared with us was: number 1, position procurement to win; number 2, set the stage; number 3, get the operating model right; number 4, prioritize those resources; 5, frame the message; and 6, leverage sales science as part of the framework as well. Any kind of closing remarks or anything, Graham, that you would say to our audience today as they set out on this journey, if they're an aspiring CPO or an established CPO but looking to go into a new role? Anything in particular that you would offer as kind of final advice?
Give back to the community and support procurement leaders and its ilk, as well as have every success in your journeys. Fantastic.
Absolute pleasure to have the chance to speak to you today. Thank you so much. As I mentioned, please do provide your feedback to us for the session from Graham and I today. Register for those upcoming webinars that we have for the remainder of the year. We have one more that we are doing with GEP, as we discussed with one of your colleagues, Shireen Ungalore, based out of Singapore, looking more at ways in which we can create a new procurement playbook for the future as well. So again, some really more progressive ideas coming from a partnership with GEP. And additional resources. I mentioned the CPO Compass as well. That is available at the Procurement Leaders website. It has its own website and landing page of its own right, of procurementleaders.com. .com/content/CPO-compass. So please do head there as well for some more depth on some of the stats that I gave throughout. But all that remains to say is a huge thank you to Graham really for sharing with us today a really engaging 6-step process there for building that C-suite influence. Graham, thanks again. Lovely to have the opportunity to talk to you, and I hope we'll have the opportunity to do so again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll speak soon. Bye for now.